Tell your children the truth, the old ambassador said, his voice shaking through the council archive. We did not stay away from human space because they threatened us. We stayed away because they asked us once, politely, and then proved they would never ask twice. Nobody laughed after that. The chamber, usually loud with translation clicks and political whispers, went still around the floating map of the Orion Spur. 1,000-star lanes glowed in clean blue lines, bending around trade hubs, mining worlds, embassy stations, and military corridors. But at the center of the display sat a dark circle with no traffic, no patrol markers, no tourist routes, and no diplomatic relays. Sol, human space. Around it, in hard red letters older than most governments in the room, was a warning every ship captain in the galaxy learned before their first jump. Do not approach without invitation. Ambassador Lyra Voss stood near the back, hands folded inside the silver sleeves of her formal robe. Her skin carried the soft blue glow of the Ilarian coast cities, faint enough to look almost human under the archive lights, but her eyes gave her away. They were too wide, too bright, too honest for a room built on fear. She had heard the phrase all her life, spoken by admirals, smugglers, priests, and frightened customs officers. Humans were the masters of war. People said it like a curse, like a prayer, like the name of a storm you did not want to see on the horizon. Lyra had never understood it. The few humans she had met were quiet, practical people. They complained about coffee, argued over parking, called their ships ugly names like Mule and Brickhouse, and apologized when they bumped into someone in a hallway. They did not look like conquerors. They looked tired. This is superstition, said High Marshal Vale Corwin, and the spell broke. He stepped into the ring of light beneath the map, nearly 8 feet tall, plated in bronze-gold skin that looked less born than forged. For black eyes studied the dark circle around Sol with open contempt. Behind him stood officers of the Oryx Dominion, straight-backed, polished, hungry for a war that would make their names permanent. One isolated mammalian species builds a fence around its home star, Vale continued, and the council spends generations pretending the fence is sacred. The old ambassador lowered his gaze. Lyra saw his fingers tremble against his cane. That frightened her more than Vale's voice. The old species were never afraid in public. Marshal, Lyra said carefully, there are records sealed for a reason. Vale turned one eye toward her, then another, until all 4 settled on her face. Records are written by survivors, Ambassador. My concern is that the galaxy has allowed human survivors to write too much. A few younger delegates murmured approval. They were tired of the no-fly zone, tired of humans being treated like a locked room in a house everyone else had to share. Vale lifted one clawed hand and touched the red warning around Sol. The map recognized his military clearance and expanded the boundary. Fort Aegis appeared on the outer edge, a small human station shaped like a steel brick floating in the cold. There, he said, one outpost, one old captain, one myth. Lyra felt the air leave her lungs. What are you planning? Vale smiled without warmth. A courtesy visit. Across the chamber, the old ambassador whispered something so softly the translator almost missed it. Almost. No, he said. Not again. But Vale had already turned toward the live broadcast drones, letting the whole council see his confidence. For too long, he announced, the galaxy has bowed to a species hiding behind bedtime stories. Today, the Oryx Dominion will cross the line around Sol. Today, we will learn whether humanity truly deserves to be called masters of war. He paused, enjoying the silence, mistaking it for admiration. Lyra looked back at the dark circle on the map and suddenly understood that it was not empty. It was quiet, and there was a terrible difference. Fort Aegis did not look like the kind of place that could scare a galaxy. It looked like something a tired government contractor had designed on a Friday afternoon. All flat armor plates, exposed maintenance ribs, and gray corridors that smelled faintly of coffee, machine oil, and recycled air. Captain Daniel Mercer liked it that way. Pretty stations invited visitors. Fort Aegis was built to make people turn around before they asked for a tour. Daniel sat alone in the night watch room with his boots hooked under the chair, a chipped ceramic mug warming his hand, and a half-finished incident report glowing on the desk in front of him. The report had nothing heroic in it. A coolant leak in Dock 3. 2 busted pressure seals. One junior technician who had ignored a warning label and nearly ruined a perfectly good Tuesday. That was the kind of war Daniel preferred now. The small, boring kind where nobody died, and the worst casualty was a toolbox floating into a fan intake. On the wall above his console was a photograph of his daughter, Megan, standing in front of a dorm building in Oregon with a backpack over one shoulder and a smile that made him feel older than 42. Beside it was a folded letter from his ex-wife that he had read 6 times and still had not answered. Not because he did not care, because some words, once said, became another kind of battlefield. The door slid open, and Lieutenant Nora Hayes stepped in carrying a fresh thermos. She was 26, sharp-eyed, and still young enough to believe that every alarm meant the beginning of history. "You look terrible, sir," she said. Daniel did not look up. "That is because I have a mirror and realistic expectations." Nora set the thermos on his desk. "Galley coffee. Real grounds. Sergeant Park has been hiding it behind the powdered eggs. Promote him. He is already enlisted. Then spiritually promote him." She smiled, but it faded when she noticed the old list open beside his keyboard. Names, dates, ship numbers. Daniel saw her looking and closed the file with 2 fingers. Nora's voice softened. "Border silence war." Daniel took a slow drink of coffee. "Old paperwork. That is not what people call it. People call things whatever helps them sleep." For a moment, the station hummed around them, steady and plain, like an old refrigerator in a quiet kitchen. Nora leaned against the console. "Sir, can I ask you something without getting the training manual answer?" "That depends how bad the question is. Why does everyone out there treat us like we are some kind of monster story?" Daniel stared at the black window beyond the glass. No stars were visible from that angle, only the faint reflection of his own tired face. Because monsters are easier to understand than regret. Nora waited. He hated that about good officers. They knew when silence meant there was more. Daniel finally said, "The galaxy thinks humans are good at war because we are angry. We are not. Anger burns out. What we are good at is remembering. Roads, fuel, weather, distance, fear. How long a mother waits before she knows the call is not coming. How many pounds of food a city needs before panic starts. How fast good people will do ugly things if they believe nobody is coming to help." Nora swallowed. "That is a hard answer. You asked for the non-manual one." A soft tone came from the main board. Not an alarm. Not yet. Just a polite little sound that made Daniel's eyes move before the rest of him did. Nora turned toward the display. Long-range buoy just pinged. Daniel set his mug down with care. "Show me." The screen filled with a cold tactical map. At the far edge of restricted space, something had crossed the outer marker and gone dark. Then another. Then dozens more. Nora's face tightened. "Transponders are off. Formation is military. I count 300 vessels." Daniel did not curse. He did not stand fast. He simply leaned forward and keyed the old microphone that no alien network could touch. His voice, when it went out across the dark, was calm enough to sound almost tired. "Unknown vessels, this is Fort Aegis. You are entering restricted defensive space. Turn around. This is your only courtesy." Nora looked at him. "Only courtesy?" Daniel watched the dots keep moving closer. "Yes," he said. "Let us hope they understand English." The Oryx fleet came through the outer marker like a man stepping across a neighbor's lawn just to prove the fence did not matter. 300 vessels, bronze and black, slid out of folded space in perfect formation, their engines glowing like hot coins against the dark. They did not fire. They did not need to. The message was the movement itself. On Fort Aegis, every console in the watchroom woke up at once, not screaming, not flashing red, just lighting in quiet rows as if the station had taken a long breath and held it. Lieutenant Nora Hayes stood beside Daniel Mercer with both hands on the back of a chair. "They heard us," she said. Daniel watched the lead ship adjust course by less than 1 degree, enough to pass directly through the warning lane. "Yes," he answered. "That is the problem." The main display opened a public broadcast before anyone requested it. High Marshal Vale Corwin appeared from the bridge of his flagship, standing beneath a ceiling of polished metal and Dominion banners. He looked calm, proud, perfectly aware that half the galaxy was watching. "Human outpost," Vale said, his translated voice smooth as a courtroom threat. "This is High Marshal Vale Corwin of the Oryx Dominion. We acknowledge your quaint border notice. We reject its authority." Nora muttered, "Quaint." That is new. Daniel lifted one finger, and she went quiet. Vale continued, enjoying every second. For generations, lesser governments have treated this region of space as though it belongs to a ghost story. We have been told to fear old human ships, old human minds, old human soldiers, and old human grief. Today that ends. Behind him, Dominion officers remained still, but their pride was obvious. They thought they were standing at the front door of history. Daniel pressed the transmit key. Marshal Corwin, your fleet has entered restricted defensive space with transponders disabled. Restore identification, reduce speed, and reverse course. You have 5 minutes to comply. Vale smiled with all 4 eyes. You sound tired, Captain. Daniel glanced at the corner of the screen, where the system had already attached Vale's name, rank, ship class, engine heat, and probable ego problem. I am tired, Daniel said. That does not make you safer. In the Council archive, Ambassador Lyra Voss watched the exchange from the same chamber where Vale had made his promise. The younger delegates whispered now, amused and excited. One of them said humans sounded smaller over radio. Another said Fort Aegis looked like a storage depot with antennas. Lyra did not answer. She was watching the older ambassadors. None of them were amused. Back at the station, Sergeant Miles Parks stepped into the watchroom. No helmet, no drama, just a tablet tucked under one arm and a half-eaten protein bar in his hand. Captain, he said, Dominion broadcast is being rebroadcast through 6 civilian networks. They want an audience. Daniel nodded. Of course they do. Park looked at the tactical display. 300 ships? That is the current count. Well, Park said, forcing a tired little smile, there goes my quiet shift. Nobody laughed, but the room steadied. That was what Daniel had always trusted about human crews. Give them fear, they joked. Give them pressure, they checked the seals. Give them a giant problem, they started making coffee. Vale's fleet advanced another 10,000 miles. The first warning buoy went dark, not destroyed, just silenced under a clean electronic blanket. Then the second, then the third. Nora's jaw tightened. They are blinding the lane. Daniel's hand rested beside the old microphone. For 1 second, he saw Megan's photograph in the reflection of the glass, his daughter smiling in Oregon sunlight, living in a world where alarms were supposed to be drills and borders were lines on maps. He thought about calling her. He did not. Instead, he keyed the transmitter again. Oryx vessels, this is your second warning. Turn around. Vale leaned closer to his camera. Or what, Captain? Daniel looked at the moving dots, then at the silent dark beyond them. Or you will make me do my job. The 5 minutes passed slower than any battle Daniel Mercer had ever seen. On the tactical board, the Oryx fleet kept sliding forward, steady and deliberate, while every human on Fort Aegis waited for permission to be afraid. Nobody ran. Nobody shouted. Nora checked the civilian traffic overlay for the 4th time. Sergeant Park confirmed the emergency shelters were sealed. 2 technicians in the back whispered through reactor math under their breath, like people praying in numbers. Daniel listened to all of it, and said nothing until the timer reached 0. Then he reached for a paper binder beneath the console. Nora stared at it. Sir, is that the rules of engagement? Yes. On paper. Paper does not lose battery. He opened it to a marked page and ran one finger down the printed lines. The gesture looked almost ridiculous beside the glowing star map and the approaching warships, but Daniel had learned a long time ago that panic hated procedure. Procedure gave fear a chair to sit in. Log the first warning, he said. Park answered from the side console. Logged. Log the second warning. Logged. Confirm no civilian hulls within the restricted lane. Nora checked again. No civilian hulls within 2 million miles. Nearest registered miner is outbound from Ceres Relay. Well, clear. Confirmed Dominion vessels are still operating with disabled transponders. Confirmed. Confirmed they silenced 3 warning buoys. Confirmed. Daniel turned the page. Then we continue to give them every chance to leave. Nora looked at him like she wanted to argue and respected him too much to do it poorly. Captain, they are using our restraint as theater. I know. The council is watching them laugh at us. I know that too. Then why are we still waiting? Daniel finally looked up. His face was calm, but his eyes were not empty. They carried something heavier than anger. Because if I press the wrong button too early, some mother on one of those ships gets a message she did not deserve. I am not giving Vale Corwin that kind of power over me. Nora's expression changed. Not softer exactly. Older. In the council archive, the same waiting felt different. Younger delegates had begun speaking louder, filling the quiet with confidence they had not earned. The humans are frozen, one said. They are bargaining with a border they cannot defend. Ambassador Lyra Voss heard the words and wanted to believe them. It would be easier if the humans were bluffing. Easier if the old stories had been exaggerated. Easier if the dark around Seoul was just politics wrapped in superstition. But the old ambassador beside her had closed his eyes. His lips moved silently, counting the warnings with Daniel. Across the broadcast, Vale Corwin spread his arms as though giving the galaxy a gift. Observe, he said. The famous guardians of Seoul hide behind courtesy. One old captain, one ugly station, and not one act of courage. His officers clicked their approval. Dominion networks repeated the line within seconds. Courage. Daniel almost smiled at that, but there was no humor in it. People who had never buried a war always talked like courage was loud. He thought of Megan again, of the time she was 7 and had asked why he never came to career day in uniform. He had told her the truth, or as much as a child could hold. Because the uniform was not a costume. Because the medals were not decorations. Because some things adults called honor were really just receipts for pain. The third alert tone sounded. Not from the Oryx fleet. From Fort Aegis itself. A Dominion targeting sweep had brushed the station, light as a hand on a doorknob. Park's voice went flat. They painted us. Nora whispered, that counts. Daniel inhaled once through his nose, slow and controlled. He did not raise his voice. He did not look away from the screen. He keyed the transmitter, and the same tired human voice crossed the dark for everyone to hear. Hi, Marshal Corwin. This is your final warning. Turn around. I am trying very hard not to kill you. The council chamber fell silent. For one clean second, even Vale seemed unsure what kind of man said a sentence like that without hate. Then he mistook mercy for fear and ordered his fleet forward. Vale's order moved through the Dominion fleet like pride given an engine. 300 ships advanced another 10,000 miles, holding formation so neatly it looked rehearsed, and maybe that was the point. They wanted the galaxy to see symmetry, discipline, power. Then the lead cruiser rotated its forward array and fired a single clean pulse at an old human weather satellite drifting near the edge of the lane. The satellite vanished from the map in a brief white blink. Nothing dramatic. No heroic music. Just one harmless, aging machine removed from the sky to prove a point. Inside Fort Aegis, nobody spoke. Daniel Mercer closed his eyes for half a second, and Nora Hayes saw the change in him. It was not anger. Anger would have been easier to understand. This was grief being folded up and put away because there was work to do. Sergeant Park read the update in a quiet voice. They fired on a registered Terran asset. Daniel opened his eyes. Log it. Logged. Nora waited for the order to return fire. Everyone did. Even the walls seemed to be waiting. Daniel did not give it. Instead, he reached below the main console and lifted a small black cover that most of the younger crew had assumed was just a maintenance panel. Beneath it was an old metal keyhole, 2 physical switches, and a green screen with blocky letters that looked older than the station itself. Nora stared. Sir, what is that? Daniel slid a chain from under his collar. A simple steel key hung beside his dog tags. Insurance nobody wanted to talk about. I thought all defensive systems were on the central grid. Most are. And this one. Daniel inserted the key. This one was built by people who did not trust central grids. Across the live feed, Vale was laughing again. You see, he told the council. A single demonstration, and the humans retreat into silence. They understand force. All primitive species do. In the archive chamber, Lyra Voss turned toward the old ambassador. Why are they not firing back? His voice came out thin. Because they are not thinking about the ships. On Fort Aegis, the green screen asked for confirmation. Daniel rested his finger near the first switch, but did not touch it yet. Lieutenant Hayes, tell me what you see. Nora looked at the tactical board. Enemy fleet. 300 hulls. Tight formation. Heavy shielding. Active weapons. That is what they want us to see. Look again. She frowned, then adjusted the overlay. Heat trails appeared. Engine timing. Fuel burn. Command relays. Tiny delays between Vale's flagship and the outer wings. Supply drones tucked behind cruisers. Cooling cycles syncing every 42 seconds. The fleet stopped looking like a wall and started looking like a body with a nervous system. Nora's voice lowered. Their command rhythm is centralized. Daniel nodded. Yes. Their outer ships are matching engine pulses from the flagship. Yes. If that timing gets disrupted, the whole formation has to slow down or risk losing spacing. There you go. Park leaned over his console. Captain, Dominion shields are tuned for direct impact, plasma, and guided ordnance. They are not showing any defense posture against passive field interference. Daniel's mouth tightened. Because they still think war is about who hits first. He flipped the first switch. Nothing exploded. No missile launched. No cannon woke up. Far outside the station, sleeping buoys that had not spoken in 12 years opened their cold eyes. Old relays stirred beneath dust and shadow. Analog signals moved through empty space, too simple to hack and too quiet to notice. On the Oryx flagship, one navigation officer blinked at a minor course correction. Marshal, we are reading gravitational noise. Bill did not look away from the broadcast. Ignore it. On Fort Aegis, Daniel flipped the second switch and spoke softly, almost to himself. Mercy Net is awake. Nora felt the words settle into the room like a door locking behind them. The Dominion fleet kept moving forward, proud and blind, while the space around it began to stop being empty. At first, Mercy Net looked like a mistake. The Oryx sensors showed nothing worth fearing. Only scattered gravitational noise, a few weak radio pings, and a temperature shift so small a civilian transport would have ignored it on the way to lunch. Vale Corwin did ignore it. He stood on his bridge with the confidence of a man who had confused silence with permission, watching Fort Aegis sit there like a gray brick in the dark. Their weapon has failed, he said. Advance. On Fort Aegis, Lieutenant Nora Hayes watched the same numbers turn strange one by one. Not red. Not urgent. Strange. The Oryx formation was still moving, but the lead ships had begun correcting course in tiny amounts, half a degree here, a quarter there. Nothing a proud commander would notice until all those small corrections became a new direction. Captain, Nora said, keeping her voice steady. Their navigational computers are compensating for field drift. Daniel Mercer nodded. Let them. They are going to think they fixed it. Good. Sergeant Park looked up from his board. Old buoys are answering. Analog chain is holding. No digital handshake, no network exposure. Nora glanced at Daniel. So they cannot hack it because it is not talking to them. Daniel took a sip of cold coffee and made a face. That is the nicest thing about old machines. They do not care what you think of them. Out in the dark, the first layer of the trap kept doing what it had been built to do. It did not attack the Oryx fleet. It educated space around it. A dormant gravity anchor nudged one cruiser just enough to force its engines to work harder. A mirror relay reflected waste heat back across a sensor lane, making one wing think the other was drifting too hot. A field of tungsten dust, spread thinner than smoke and darker than ash, waited in a path no sane pilot would choose unless his own computer quietly suggested it. On the Oryx flagship, the navigation officer finally turned from his console. Marshal, the fleet is experiencing inconsistent positional drag. Vale's four eyes narrowed. Meaning empty space is behaving incorrectly. Empty space does not behave. It is now, sir. In the council archive, that line went through the chamber like a cold draft. The younger delegates stopped smiling. Ambassador Lyra Voss leaned closer to the broadcast, her blue-silver skin dimming slightly with fear she could not hide. They still have not fired, she whispered. The old ambassador beside her answered, that is the lesson. The Oryx fleet responded the way proud empires always responded when confused. They added power. Engines brightened. Shield harmonics rose. Artificial intelligence systems began searching for hostile code, jamming patterns, hidden missiles, stealth drones, anything that looked like the kind of war they understood. Mercy Net gave them nothing. No code. No missile. No target. Just physics, patience, and old human paranoia. One Dominion destroyer broke formation by less than a mile. Its shield did not fail. Its hull did not break. But every alarm on its bridge woke at once as fine particles scraped across its outer sensor skin, blinding half its forward array. Another ship cut speed to avoid it, forcing three more to adjust. The perfect Oryx formation bent. Not much, but enough. Nora stared at the cascade. They are tripping over their own corrections. Daniel's jaw tightened. That is what happens when a fleet is built to obey one proud man instead of survive a bad day. Vale finally looked away from the cameras. Locate the human weapon. His officer sounded smaller now. Marshal, there is no weapon signature. Then locate the station control signal. There is no signal. Then what is doing this? On Fort Aegis, Daniel heard the open broadcast delay catch the panic in that question. He did not smile. He only looked at the map and spoke softly enough that Nora almost missed it. The part of us that planned for you before your grandfather learned our name. Then MercyNet opened its second layer, and every Oryx screen filled with stars that were not where they were supposed to be. The false stars were not beautiful to the Oryx crews. They were impossible. One moment, every Dominion navigation screen showed Fort Aegis ahead, steady and ugly in the dark. The next, the station appeared in 6 different places at once, each image backed by heat, mass, and old radio chatter that matched too perfectly to dismiss. The artificial intelligence systems chose the brightest signal and corrected course toward it. The human buoys quietly taught them another lie. On the flagship, Vale Corwin gripped the edge of his command rail hard enough to make the metal complain. Restore visual confirmation. Visual is unreliable. Marshal, the navigation officer said. Starlight is being reflected through some kind of passive lattice. Then use gravity. Gravity is worse. Then use your eyes. The officer looked up at the forward glass, where empty space stretched calm and black. Sir, my eyes say we should stop. For the first time since crossing the line, nobody on the Oryx bridge laughed. On Fort Aegis, Daniel Mercer heard that silence through the open feed. He knew the sound. It was the exact moment a commander realized the battle in his head was not the battle in front of him. Nora Hayes stood beside him, pale under the console glow. They are boxed in. Not boxed, Daniel said. Guided. Toward what? Daniel did not answer at first. He looked down at the paper binder. At the next page he hoped he would not need. The words disable only were printed in bold across the top. Beneath them were 3 authorization lines. Each one written after some past disaster had taught humanity another rule it wished it had known sooner. Park called from the side console. Dominion forward arrays are charging. I am reading full offensive posture. Nora snapped her head toward Daniel. They are going to fire blind. Daniel closed his eyes for one breath. In that breath, he was not on Fort Aegis. He was 12 years younger, standing in a ship corridor while alarms echoed and men and women waited for him to make the call nobody wanted to own. He remembered how heavy a human voice could feel when it said the word execute. He remembered how easy it was, afterward, for politicians to call it necessary. He opened his eyes. His hand was steady because he forced it to be. Open wideband. Park did it. Daniel leaned toward the old microphone. Hi, Marshal Corwin. Your fleet is currently inside a non-lethal containment field designed to prevent escalation. Power down your weapons and accept escort out of restricted space. Vale appeared again, but the pride on his face had started to crack around the edges. You expect the Oryx Dominion to surrender to traffic equipment? Daniel looked at the fleet markers, all those lives wrapped inside bronze hulls. All those people who had probably been told humans were cowards and myths and soft things. No, he said. I expect you to stop making your crew pay for your ego. Vale's eyes hardened. All ships, fire on the human station. The order reached 300 vessels. 300 firing chains tried to wake. MercyNet moved first. Not with explosions. Not with flame. With denial. Reactor outputs sank below combat threshold. Plasma chambers vented heat into empty space. Weapon doors locked halfway open and then froze in safe position. Command links severed ship by ship until Vale's perfect fleet became 300 separate problems, with 300 frightened captains asking for instructions that no longer arrived. On Fort Aegis, the board filled with amber instead of red. Disabled. 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 Nora whispered. 0 confirmed breaches. Life support still green across the fleet. Daniel let out a breath he had not meant to hold. Then Vale's flagship tried to override the lock manually. Daniel saw it before anyone else. One stubborn spike of power, one last attempt to turn pride into catastrophe. His voice dropped. Cut him off. Park's fingers moved. A silent gravity clamp caught the flagship like a hand closing around a match before it touched the curtains. Vale's bridge lights dimmed. His banners hung still. His weapons went cold. For the first time, The High Marshal had no speech ready. Daniel opened the channel one last time. You are alive because we built the system that way. Please do not make us regret being careful. In the Council archive, Lyra Voss covered her mouth, not from horror, but from the terrible relief of understanding. The humans had not shown the galaxy how well they could destroy. They had shown how much work it took for them not to. For a while, nobody in the Council archive knew what to do with mercy. Fear would have been simpler. If the human station had shattered the Oryx fleet, the delegates could have named it cruelty, filed protests, demanded sanctions, and hidden behind the clean language governments use when they are terrified. But 300 Dominion ships were still there, drifting in controlled silence, their crews alive, their air systems stable, their weapons cold, and their commander trapped inside his own bad decision. That was harder to explain. Ambassador Lyra Voss watched the life sign scroll across the public feed, green line after green line, and felt something twist in her chest. The humans had held a blade to the throat of an invading fleet and used it like a seatbelt. On Fort Aegis, Nora Hayes read the final containment report twice before she trusted her voice. Captain, all Dominion reactors are below combat output. Emergency power remains active. Medical channels are open. We are receiving distress requests, but no casualty declarations. Sergeant Park leaned back from his console, rubbing both hands over his face. That is the cleanest ugly thing I have ever seen. Daniel Mercer did not answer right away. He stared at the casualty projection window in the corner of his screen. The number beside confirmed loss of life stated 0. Only then did his shoulders drop, just a little, like a man setting down a weight he had expected to carry forever. Nora noticed. Sir. Daniel blinked, as if he had forgotten there were other people in the room. Start rescue coordination. Prioritize environmental faults, then stranded maintenance crews, then anyone whose captain is too proud to ask for help. Park gave him a tired look. So everyone? Pretty much. The open channel crackled, and Vale Corwin appeared on the screen again. His bridge was dim now, his golden armor lit by emergency strips, his officers speaking in low, urgent voices behind him. He looked smaller without momentum. Not weak, exactly, but newly introduced to consequence. Captain Mercer, Vale said, forcing each word into place. Why are my ships still intact? Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Because I wanted them intact. You had advantage. Yes. You could have ended the Dominion fleet. Yes. Vale's 4 eyes narrowed, confused by an answer that offered no apology and no pride. Then why did you not take victory? Daniel leaned closer to the microphone. His voice stayed calm, but it carried something the translators could not flatten. Because killing is easy. Ending a war without teaching your enemy to love revenge is the hard part. The sentence moved through the council chamber like a door opening in a sealed room. Lyra saw younger delegates look away from the broadcast, ashamed of how quickly they had mistaken restraint for weakness. The old ambassador beside her bowed his head, not to Daniel, but to the memory of every warning nobody had wanted to hear. On Fort Aegis, Daniel tapped a file on his screen and sent it to the council archive. Not a threat, a history lesson. Images of old human treaties appeared beside maps of ruined cities, ration lines, empty schools, memorial walls, families waiting in airport terminals for people who would never walk through the gate. No graphic spectacle, no celebration of power, just the plain record of a species that had learned too much from its own worst days. Daniel's voice followed the file. You call us dangerous because we know how to fight. That is only half the truth. We are dangerous because we know what fighting does after the shooting stops. It gets into the schools, the elections, the dinner table. It teaches children old hate with new names. So when we build weapons, we build locks. When we build plans, we build off switches. When we set a border, we mean it, because every line we draw is there to keep somebody alive on both sides. Lyra looked at the dark circle around Sol and finally understood. Human space was not a fortress built from arrogance. It was a scar with a doorbell. Vale lowered his gaze, and for the first time, he had nothing worth saying. The emergency hearing began 12 hours later, though nobody in the council archive had truly left. Delegates slept in chairs, whispered into private channels, and watched the disabled Oryx fleet drift under human escort like a lesson nobody wanted but everyone needed. By then, Fort Aegis had become the quiet center of the galaxy. Not because it had conquered anything, because it had refused to become what Vale Corwin expected. Daniel Mercer appeared before the council on a plain video feed from the station watchroom. No banners, no throne, no dramatic lighting. Just a tired man in a dark uniform with a coffee mug near his elbow and a paper binder still open on the desk. High Marshal Vale stood in a separate feed from his powerless flagship, his armor dimmed, his voice stripped of performance. Ambassador Lyra Voss chaired the hearing because no one else wanted to hold the room steady. "Captain Mercer," she said, "the Oryx Dominion has agreed to withdraw from restricted space, surrender all operational data from this incident, repair the damaged Terran asset, and recognize the sole boundary as sovereign defensive territory." Daniel nodded once. "That is acceptable." Vale lifted his head. There was still pride in him, but it had been bent into something quieter. "And what does humanity demand beyond that?" Daniel looked at him. "Nothing." A murmur moved through the chamber. Vale seemed almost insulted. "You expect us to believe you have no terms of humiliation. I expect you to believe I have work tomorrow." For the first time in many hours, Sergeant Park's tired laugh could be heard faintly off-screen. Daniel ignored it. Vale leaned closer. "You could force concessions from half the council right now. You could make the galaxy kneel." Daniel's eyes moved to the side of his desk, to the photograph of Megan in Oregon sunlight. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "Marshal, every person who thinks power is proven by making someone kneel has already lost the part of themselves worth protecting." The room went quiet in a different way then. Not fear. Listening. Daniel continued. "My daughter once asked me why our species builds so many locks. Door locks, weapon locks, child locks, safety locks. I told her it is because we learned that wanting to do something and having the right to do it are not the same thing. That is what restraint is. It is a lock you put on yourself before the world has to." Lyra felt those words settle across the chamber like dust after a storm. She had grown up believing peace was an agreement between governments. Now she wondered if peace was also a private discipline, repeated in small choices by people who would never be thanked for them. Vale lowered his gaze. "Then the stories were wrong," he said. "Humans are not masters because you love war." Daniel picked up his coffee, noticed it was cold, and set it back down. "No, we are masters because we hate what war does when amateurs start one." The council map changed that day. The red warning around Sol remained, but Lyra requested one sentence be added beneath it, not as a threat, but as a reminder. Human space, peaceful by choice, untouchable by experience. Years later, young pilots still slowed when they passed that line. Some mocked it until their captains made them read the hearing transcript. Some whispered the name Fort Aegis like a prayer. But the ones who understood looked at the dark around Sol and saw something greater than a weapon. They saw a civilization strong enough to stop, angry enough to act, and disciplined enough to know the difference. And somewhere inside that old gray station, Daniel Mercer finally called his daughter, told her he was safe, and listened while she talked about ordinary things: classes, rain, rent, bad coffee. He stayed on the line until the sun rose over Oregon, grateful beyond words that, for one more morning, ordinary things were still possible.